The first thing I noticed that morning was how relaxed my stepfather looked. People say grief changes a room. At the law office, it didn't feel like grief had changed much of anything. The chairs were too stiff, the blinds were half closed, and the air smelled faintly like old carpet cleaner. My grandmother had been gone for 10 days. The will reading was scheduled quickly. My stepfather sat with his legs stretched out slightly under the table, like someone waiting for a routine meeting to start. His jacket hung loosely over the back of his chair. Every so often he glanced at me, the way you glance at someone who doesn't matter to the outcome. For years, that had been his posture toward me. I stayed quiet. Across from us, the attorney organized a stack of papers with careful movements. 2 other relatives had declined to attend. My stepfather had made a point of saying they probably already knew what the will would say. "Your grandmother liked to keep things simple," he'd said in the hallway earlier. He said it like the future had already been sorted. The truth was, my grandmother had never liked simple things when it came to people. The memory of her voice came back to me then, not from the hospital, but from months earlier. She had been sitting in her kitchen, wrapped in a cardigan even though it was warm outside. Illness had made her thinner, but her eyes were still precise. Observant. Nothing passed her unnoticed. "You keep records?" she had asked me one afternoon. I remember being confused. Records of what? "Everything he does that isn't right." She didn't say it dramatically. It sounded more like a practical instruction than an accusation. I hesitated. "Why?" She stirred her tea slowly. "Because sometimes patience is more useful than confrontation." That conversation had changed the shape of the following months. At first, I thought she just wanted reassurance. But the questions continued. Financial decisions that had seemed odd. Documents that had been moved, accounts she hadn't authorized. The way she asked about them felt less emotional and more procedural. Eventually, she asked if I would help her speak to someone. Then someone else. And eventually people who spoke carefully, listened more than they talked, and never promised outcomes. It didn't feel like planning a downfall. It felt like organizing facts. Back in the law office, the attorney cleared his throat. My stepfather leaned forward slightly. "This shouldn't take long," he said. The lawyer began reading. "Legal language has a strange rhythm. It flattens emotion. Converts a life into clauses and conditions." My grandmother's name appeared again and again in those paragraphs, attached to things she had built slowly over decades. Savings, property, trust arrangements. My stepfather's posture changed when the attorney reached a particular section. His shoulders stiffened. His eyes narrowed slightly. The room went quiet except for the turning of paper. I didn't smile. But something about my face must have irritated him, because suddenly he pushed his chair back with a harsh scrape. "You think this is funny?" he said. I hadn't spoken. The lawyer looked up, startled. Before anyone could say anything else, my stepfather moved closer to me, anger rising too quickly for the room to catch up. The slap landed sharp and fast across my face. It wasn't the hardest hit I'd ever taken from him. But it was the first one with witnesses. For a moment the room froze. The attorney half stood, unsure what to do. My stepfather straightened like he had just restored order. "You sit there acting smug," he said. I didn't react the way he expected. My cheek burned. I could feel the heat spreading slowly. But I stayed seated, quiet. The silence stretched long enough that confusion crept across his face. That was when the door behind him opened. 2 people stepped into the room. They didn't rush. They didn't raise their voices. They simply walked in with the calm posture of people who already understood the situation. One of them spoke first. "Mr. Carver." My stepfather turned. "Wes, we need to speak with you outside." The attorney blinked. "What is this about?" The second agent answered evenly. "We're with the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The words settled over the room like a slow weight. My stepfather laughed once, short and sharp. "This is ridiculous." But the agents didn't react. They simply waited. sir. The first one said again, would like you to come with us. For the first time that morning, my stepfather looked uncertain. He glanced around the room. At the lawyer. At me. At the folder of documents still open on the table. And something in his expression changed. Not panic, recognition. Because the questions my grandmother had asked months earlier hadn't stayed inside that kitchen. They had turned into records. Then conversations. Then investigations that moved quietly through places he had assumed no one would look. He looked back at me one more time. That was when I allowed the smallest trace of a smile to appear. Not triumph, not anger. Just recognition of a long process finally reaching daylight. The agents escorted him out of the room without force. The door closed behind them. For several seconds no one spoke. The attorney slowly lowered himself back into his chair. What just happened? He said quietly. I looked down at the papers on the table. My grandmother's handwriting was visible on one of the notes attached to the file. Her small, careful script. Organized. Patient. The same way she had lived. She believed in documentation, I said. The lawyer studied my face then nodded slowly. Outside in the hallway, footsteps moved away. I felt something then that wasn't quite relief. My grandmother wasn't there to see it. The kitchen conversations were over. The house she had lived in for 40 years was empty now. But something she had insisted on, something steady and deliberate, had still carried forward. The attorney gathered the remaining pages. We should finish the reading, he said. I nodded. And for the first time that morning, the room felt quieter than it had before.